Amen. So welcome to church. If this is your first time back at church for the year, Happy New Year, Happy New Decade, Happy New 2020, whatever you want to call it. And if you weren't here last week, I encourage you to go online. I'm hoping it's online, last week's sermon. If it's not online, Pastor Paul can give you a 5-minute quick excerpt if you're very generous. About what Pastor Paul spoke on last week about thank God you're here. I really thank God that God's here and God's in the midst and that we can't do anything, we can't move without God. And just looking at getting incredible messages to start the year, to start the decade. And as I was asked to speak last year, asked to speak this week, I was reading the Bible and ironically, I was reading Genesis at the start of the year, and I always used to think, when we used to do things in school, you used to turn to the Bible, preach used to be like, get out your Bible, you used to be like, go to this book. As a bad pastor's kid, I would sometimes go to the front, what do they call that? Index, yes, and look up where the page number is. Otherwise, you just scroll and you'd be like, nah, I've missed it. You scroll again. The best part about Genesis is it's at the start. You can't miss Genesis unless you've just got a New Testament Bible. That's a problem. Otherwise, you can't miss Genesis, right? And you can't miss Genesis 1 because Genesis 1 is the start. So I'm just going to read Genesis 1 to 27. And yeah, it may be on the screens, it may not be. But it says, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was formless, with a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Or the Spirit of God over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let us separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. That's confusing. And it was so. God called the dome sky. Makes more sense. And there was evening and there was morning in the second day. All right. We're on day 2. Stay with me. And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be lights in the domes of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 4th day. Yikes. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swam, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. And God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, everything that creeps on the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle and the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Verse 27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. If you can read that very quickly, right? You should get through Genesis 1, tick that off the reading plan. God created it, great, God created it. Get through very quickly. And the author uses the words days, but the time is not in the concept of God. It talks about in verse 1, it says, in the beginning when God created. And actually God is outside of the beginning even. God is outside of that beginning, and this is literally just a way of the author conveying to the audience or to the people on how to narrate this story. But it's in the beginning, God was already there. There's nothing in the beginning. So if you just take in the beginning, shift the when God. If you just say God and then in the beginning created, you'll see that the picture is that there is God and there is nothing, and then God starts to create. And I'm thinking about it this morning, and I went to Kmart last night. I was kind of bored. My wife was at work, so I'm like, I'll go to Kmart. I can spend money on a sermon. That's a great way to buy Lego. If you're ever preaching, do something with Lego so you can buy Lego. And of course, you buy Star Wars Lego. Why not? But when you buy Lego, you get a creation manual. And shout out to the kids who put together the Lego. Steph's like, I'll put it together for you. And then Steph found kids to put the Lego together who actually knew what Star Wars was. Shout out to the kids who put this together for me in record time. But when you get Lego, you get all the pieces. They're all kind of numbered and whatnot in bags. And then there's an instruction manual. And if you haven't seen the Lego movie, I highly recommend the Lego movie. But everything is there for you. It's foolproof. They've designed everything. All you need to do is put it together in the way that they've asked you to put it together, and you will have the nice picture or the nice figurine that the outside of the box shows you. Now, this is very simple Lego. I think there's maybe 10, 15 pieces. You can buy Lego sets that have thousands of pieces, and that if you muck it up, you got to go all the way back, fix it up, start again. It's a nightmare. And that's why I don't dabble in Lego too much, and if I do, it's the simple stuff. But God, in the beginning, there is no instruction manual. There's no kind of even material. There's no kind of box that says this is what the earth will look like. It's just God. And I just want to read some fundamental truths from this creation story before I really get into my message. But really, number one, in the beginning, like I've said, was God and only God. The first couple of verses really accentuate that. The heavens, God created and God creates the heavens and the earth. The earth is formless and void. Darkness covered the face, while the wind from God, or the Spirit of God, swept over the face of the waters. And really, the Hebrew writer would say when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, it actually means God created the whole universe. They're really conveying this, obviously, to us on earth and the people believing in heaven where God is. But really, when God created the heavens and the earth, it's not that he just created the heavens and then the earth and then the rest of the galaxy is some other story. But it's when God created the heavens and the earth, everything that we know as creation was created. The second one, God is the creator of light and day. We see it in verse 3 and 5. He says, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. The third one, God is the creator of the above and below. And I'm just trying to get creative here in my words. So you're going to hear some things that say above and below. Just means sky and waters, okay? Just that's all that means. Number 4, God is the creator of substance or the earth. Number 5, God is the creator of life within. And God starts to form the animals. He creates the life above and below, and then he creates life within the earth. And the 6th one, God is the creator of day and night. And you see this, everything's just starting to take shape now. Everything that we understand is creation. If you had been sitting here watching God create it, you'd be like, I don't really understand how this is going to work, but hey, it's God, so I'm sure it's going to work. But on this side of creation, as we are, we understand how this all makes sense, right? We understand how this all comes together, this all forms, this happens, this happens, this happens. But God, in this beauty, in this magnificence, God creates the day and the night, and he starts to create the lights, he starts to create the stars, and then he starts to create the seasons, and he starts to create, you see this forming of time. The 7, God is the creator of life above and below. Sorry, number 5 was in reference to vegetation. My bad. 7 is the creator of life above and below, the birds and the fish, the seawater. Number 8, God is the creator of life on, and you see the animals start to form. And then number 9, God is the creator of you and me. And the common denominator throughout all of creation is God. The common denominator is the creator. There is no creation without creator. But the common denominator is that it's God says and it is done. God says and it is done. God is before creation. He is during creation. He is after creation. But he's ever present within creation. All right, it is always God. And because of God, we have everything we can see, we can hear, we breathe, and we feel around us. And everything that is around us is because of God. And everything that is around us is a representation of God. For creation mimics the creator. And I'm thinking about this, and in college, there's this Latin term, ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is this theological phrase that means created out of nothing. Literally something created out of nothing. And it's not necessarily a Hebrew phrase, rather it's a phrase termed in the 2nd century by a very early church historian and church father. But he looks at creation, this gentleman, Justin Martyr, he looks at creation and he kind of puts it, and it's God is before, God is in the beginning, God is before everything. So that God is outside of creation, God is so much bigger than creation, but out of nothing something is formed. That's not possible for us. I don't know if you've ever played with Play-Doh. Again, I went to Kmart last night to also buy Play-Doh. Really living it up on my Saturday nights. I went outside to buy Play-Doh. Kmart had this thing called Centos. It's not my style. It's not my jam. Centos is the same thing, but it smells. It's not what I needed. So I asked somebody else to bring Play-Doh because you only need the original stuff. And so this Play-Doh, courtesy of the Watling girls, if you can look inside, you can see multiple different colours of Play-Doh already smashed together. So already my OCD is a little bit out of it. But even in Play-Doh, as you create Play-Doh and as you form Play-Doh, used to do different things as kids to pass the time, there's still the substance, right? Play-Doh is the substance that we have. Different coloured Play-Doh, different sized Play-Doh, whatever it is, we still have Play-Doh. And because we have Play-Doh, we can create. Because we have substance, we can form. But ex nihilo, or the forming of something out of nothing, this is something impossible for us. In the Amplified version of Genesis 1:1, it says, "In the beginning God, or Elohim, created by forming from nothing the heavens and the earth." Forming from nothing. It's not necessarily a concept I can always wrap my head around because you're trying to think about it. But then again, we're so limited in our thinking about it. But God from nothing, just God, nothing but God, and from nothing He begins to form. That's mind-blowing. We can conceive this thought. We can have an idea based on inspiration. We can have an idea watching what somebody else does. We can be inspired to do something. We can follow examples of those before us. We can read instruction manuals. But we can never form from nothing. We can never simply just create. We always need a substance. So I'm guessing maybe you're asking, maybe not, what does this have to do with me? I get we're creation, we reflect Creator, that's great. I'm not really good at creating or building anything or designing anything. And theologian Bruce Waltke outlines that God's word has primacy over the event. And if you look back at the Genesis event, God creates, and then God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. And what Waltke is saying is that God speaks and it exists. Much in everything God does, it is His word that has power. And this is all seen through the creation story. The significance and the power lies within God, not within necessarily the event or that we were created. And as Bruce Waltke is trying to say is that God's word has the power. All God does is have to speak, and then there is creation. I can't speak anything into creation. I can speak words of life, but to do something or to make something, I physically have to go there. But God just speaks, and there it is. It says, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And the power lies within God. It's not necessarily, though the act is amazing and the act is miraculous, but the power lies because God said something and something happened. And maybe that's just something that I can sit with you for now. Reading Genesis 1:1 in the NET, the commentator says, and this is where we get into the Hebrew in case you're waiting for that. The English verb create, which is bara, B-A-R-A, with a bunch of lines on top that I don't know what means what. Bara, the word create, captures well the meaning of the Hebrew term in this context. It's a verb always describing the divine activity of fashioning something new, fresh, and perfect. And then in the New Living Translation, the Holy Spirit-filled Bible, it says, thus bara is a fitting word to describe both by bringing into existence and creating, and by fashioning existing matter into something new as God did in creating man. In Genesis 1:27, out of the dust from the ground, God is always the subject of the verb bara. it is in its standard form. Creating is therefore in its divine capacity. Basically, bara, there's two kind of create words in Hebrew. The other one, asa, means kind of creating, but asa can also mean that humans can be its subject. Bara is only God. Bara only has God as its subject. Bara is only divine. It can't be done by anybody else. It can't be thought of by anybody else. But rather, bara, to create something entirely new or to fashion something into something new. And I'll get to that in a second. But it's the word for creating new or fresh, as I just said. And it always and only has God as its subject. This only exists when God is on the move. And bara only exists when God is on the scene. It only exists when it is through God. He brings the refreshing, He brings the growth, and He brings the restoration. And we see bara again in Psalm 51. Psalm 51 written by David after he's had this massive stuff up in his life. He's caused somebody to die because he slept with the man's wife. Just messy story. And his prophet and his friend comes and confronts him. And David, in turning to God, realizing the severity or the weight of what he's done, he turns to God and he says, create in me a new heart. Now literally that doesn't mean create a new heart, because it's not going to make sense. It doesn't work that way. But really what David is saying is create or refresh or refine or restore or redeem my heart. Redeem me back to the Creator. Redeem me back. Change my heart. And that's what bara is there. It's a prayer of desperation from a man who has gravely sinned. Ultimately, this word is only seen and used in reference to God's divinity, for it is not possible in our humanity. And bara, as I said, God is always the subject, and it's always divine. It's always God as the divine subject. Again, we see this in Ezekiel 37, 3-6. And the prophet Ezekiel, speaking about God, he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I said to him, Sovereign Lord, you know. Great line. If God ever asks you a question, just say you know. It's a great line. I know. Then he said to me, prophesy over these bones and tell them, dry bones, listen to the Lord's message. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. Look, I am about to infuse breath into you and you will live. I will put tendons on you, muscles over you, and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you and you will live. Then you will know that I am Lord. And in Genesis 2:7, Adam is formed from the dust. But as Adam is formed from the dust, it is the breath of life from God that brings man into existence. And similar to what's happening here in Ezekiel, God takes Ezekiel, shows Ezekiel this dry valley, just the bones of death, of despair, of nothingness. And he says, Son of man, can these bones live? And Ezekiel, either in wisdom or in cockiness, I do not know, he says, Sovereign Lord, you know. And often it's always God knows. And then he said to me, prophesy over these bones and tell them, dry bones, listen to the Lord's message. This is what the sovereign Lord says to you to say to these bones. Look, I am about to infuse breath into you and you will live. I will put tendons on you and muscles over you and will cover you with skin. I will breathe in you and you will live. Then you will know that I am Lord. The difference between this and Genesis 2:7 is that these are bones, maybe previously, maybe metaphorically, but these are bones already dead, already gone without life. Life has begun and life has ended. And in Genesis 2:7, God has just creating life and creating man. But in this picture in Ezekiel, this is man at its end, right? We all have our ending. We're not finite, we're not eternal, and that we pass on. And God says to Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel goes, God, I don't know that I can say it, but I know that in you they can live. And in you they can be reformed and restored. He doesn't think in his earthly mindset. But when God asks a question, only God can answer. The prophet reflects back to God in that same, you know, I don't know. I love that he doesn't say, I don't know, but you do. He just says, God, you know. As if God needs to know that he doesn't know. He just says, God, you know. And through faith, the prophet participates in the miracle. Verse 5, I will cause a breath to enter you and you shall live. God could have easily just risen the restored life, and that's great. But God says, after the prophet's faith, and after the prophet says, God, you know, and God says to the prophet, now I want you to participate. I want you to bring this to life, not because of your power, but because of your faith. I want you to speak into the dry bones. To speak into these situations that are dead, that are barren, that have lived and that are gone. and speak God's life back into them, bring them restore. If you're still asking, what does this have to do with us? Please go back over your notes. God begins with creation. He continues with creation. And as it is in Genesis 2:7, God forms man from the dust. And then God breathes life. And regardless of the previous day, of the month, of the year, of the decade, the century, the millennia, whatever it is, God breathes into us afresh. The first breath comes from God. You may be born and you get pulled out of the womb, they cut the cord and you start breathing, but the first ever breath came from God. Ex nihilo, the first breath came from nothing. And then in bara, God uses that existing substance, that forming man out of dust, and he breathes it into existence. And it's his purposes and his designs that we would bring praise back to him. That's the whole point of creation. It's the whole point of breathing again, of being refreshed, is that we reflect the Creator. That as creation, as we move and as we have our being, I'll get to Acts 17 soon, as we are formed and as we are shaped and as we start to grow and we start to understand how to walk and we start to understand how to speak, that it all reflects the Creator God. In Acts 17, 24 to 28, Paul speaking says, "The God who made the world and everything in it, who is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as if he needed anything, but because he gives life and breath and everything to everyone. From one man he made the nation of the human race to inhabit the entire earth, determining their set times and the fixed limits of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope around him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him," perfect, amazing verse, "for in him we live and move about and exist. As if some of your own poets have said, we too are his offspring." And what Paul's talking about is going into this synagogue in Acts as he's spreading the word on his mission, and they're worshipping God, but out the front is still a statue that they're either trying to fashion to describe God. And Paul says, the God who made everything does not live in temples made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as if he needed anything, as if he needs anything from us to live or find worth. But rather the one who gives life and breath, Paul talks about, that's the reason we search for him. That's the reason we go for him. In our limitations and in everything that we can only do so much, we go after the God who can do everything and who did everything. We go after the God who gives life and who gives breath. For in him we live and move about, or for in him we exist and we have our being, for we too are his offspring. And Paul starts to talk about identity there. That creation, as we are creation, we reflect the maker, but we are made in his image. And this is obviously something found back in Genesis 1:27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them male and female. And this is a wild thing. It doesn't say that about the animals. It doesn't say that about the fish. It doesn't say that about the vegetation, the life, the food, the creation around us, though that's amazing and God created that. But only is humankind formed in his image. Only is humankind breathed life into the nostrils of. Only in humankind does God put his image and his likeness. Do we absolutely reflect the Creator? And what Paul is talking about is the completion of the creating narrative and the restoration brought by Christ. I listened to a sermon by Pastor Robert Ferguson, I was in class, Pastor Robert Ferguson, and he says, if you do not bring, when you are preaching, your word back to Christ, then you are not preaching, you are simply teaching. That's mind-blowing to me. So every time I get up now to speak or believe, it's how does this connect to us and how does this connect to the cross? And in the beginning, as the OT writers will say, that in the beginning, that when it is in the beginning, mind you, keep God outside of the beginning just for the sake of this one. When it is in the beginning, that means there is an end. The OT writers talk about in the beginning means that in the beginning of creation, there is also an end point to creation. Obviously not God. God is outside of time. But then in the New Testament, they start to talk about how the OT and the New T start to come together in Jesus. And that is actually, obviously, it's one Bible, it's one book. And we have Old Testament and New Testament just to break it up for sake. But this is the completion of the creation narrative. That what God has created in physical form, Christ is about to release or create or give way to in eternal form at the cross. And as Christ goes to the cross and dies a death undeserving, makes a sacrifice that none of us could make, and out of nothing he brings forth salvation. Just as out of nothing God created creation. That these two are connecting and aligning these two pictures, these two understandings, that there is an end to everything, but in God there is eternity. In Christ there is salvation. What is created, and as Ezekiel saw, can come back to life. Again, it can be brought back to life, but those will still pass on. But in God, nothing is impossible. And in Jesus, in the salvation that we find at the cross, while we physically may pass away, eternally and in our souls, in our spirits, we will live through God, for God, and only God. So what is it, the outset of your year? These 12 days into the year, the 12 days into the decade, what is it that you're believing for that needs to be created anew? I was meeting with the executive team this week, and we're talking about this campus. And we're talking about wanting to do this and wanting to do that. And we had an amazing launch team dinner party, food night on Wednesday. And if you weren't able to make it to that, but you still want to be part of the team, or you just want to know what the heck it is that we're trying to do, please come and see us after the service. We're speaking to the exec team. There's this book by Craig Rochelle called Dangerous Prayers. It's coming out soon in a month in Australia. And in this book, Craig Rochelle talks about dangerous prayers being dangerous prayers are the ones prayed that only God can answer. Sometimes you pray prayers. I know I've been praying prayers a lot this week, starting a new job, and I pray prayers that are, God, if this can happen, or if I can do this, or God, if this situation can arise, or if this happens, that'll be great. But dangerous prayers is praying something that cannot be answered by us, that is essentially bara. It is essentially something that only the divine can do, only the divine can bring forth. And we can do all these things, but in the end we need to pray prayers so outlandish, so big, that if God doesn't come through, there's no way that prayer is going to happen. There's no way that prayer is going to be seen. And just, what are you praying for that only He can answer? Or what are you praying for that you're trying to answer yourself? What are you believing to be restored that only He can restore? What are you needing to be sprung up back into your life? I can create something, but the Lego's designed to only look like the Lego, right? The Lego's designed to look like the box. You can create something hideous, or maybe good. I don't know. It depends how good your creative skills are. Mine, not so much. Follow the instructions. And then again, we can create something, but there's still limitations to the Play-Doh. There's still limitations to the substance that we have. But what God is able to do is unlimitless. What God is able to do is beyond what we can imagine. But what God is able to do is so much greater than we can ever imagine. It's like, why would you want to imagine what God can do? Why would you want to put God in the limitations of what God can create, when God can create is so much bigger than what we can see, what we can think of, what we can conceive? And in this dangerous prayers, what is the prayer that you need to be answered, or what is the prayer that you need to pray that can only be answered by God? As the band would start to come up. And the title of my message, not that I said it because that sounds like me, is The Creator God is Creating Still. But when will we let the Creator still be the one who creates? When will we let the Creator be the one who creates in us? When will we let the Creator be the one who creates for us? And when will we let the Creator be the one that creates? Only He can create for His glory. And in Genesis 1:27-31, so God created humankind in His image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. In verse 28, God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Speaking to the humans. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I've given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything He had made, and indeed it was good. It was very good. And there was evening and there was morning on the sixth day. And God does is good. And the word good here is not, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's nice, that's good. The word good here is perfect. The word good is something, it's so hard for us to English translate now because it's such a used word in our vocabulary, and that we've given other words great, magnificent over it. But what God says is good. There's nothing greater. There's nothing more perfect. There's nothing against God. There's nothing against creation. There's nothing that comes up against creation in kind of levels. You can't compare to creation. I don't know if you try and compare yourself with one another, and that's another message. But you can't compare anything against creation. We can build massive buildings and we can build planes and we can build amazing things, but you can't compare to what God has done. And what God created was and is good, and what God is doing is still good. To be created by God and to be a product of His creation comes with an investment and title bestowed upon us, made in His image. To be found in God means we are found in His kingdom. We are executors of His plan and purposes on this planet. An investment is something worth time, effort, and energy. We are worth this and much more. That's what it means to be a creation of the Most High. We reflect the Creator, and we are gifted with creativity and innovations and ideas and abilities to create. But we reflect the Creator, the one who is perfect. We may not be perfect, but we reflect Him. And as I'm ending, what can be done with God is much more than what can be done without Him. I'm just going to sit in that thought for a second. You can do amazing things in your life. You can be an amazing person, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But what you can do with God is so much greater than what you could ever do without God. What you can do with your family, what you can do in your life, what can happen in your job, what can happen in your finances, your spiritual growth, your physical growth, what can be done with God, you can't find it anywhere else. There's no comparable, there's no comparison, there's nothing. There is nothing. And as Pastor Paul talked about last week on Gideon, what Gideon asked the God, only God could bring forth. And then when Gideon went to war and went from 32,000 to 300, only God could bring forth that kind of victory. But it was to show Gideon that only if you have this victory, it's because God came through. That only if God comes through will this victory happen. Only if God comes through will this even work, will this even make sense. And then I wrote, secondly, what can be done only by God is so much more than what we could ever conceive, and that's bara. Ezekiel participated in the miracle because he placed his faith in someone much bigger than himself. Physically, those dry bones could not come back to life. But when God asked Ezekiel, and Ezekiel said to God, the creator of everything and everyone, the creator of creation, the creator himself, Ezekiel turns back to God and says, God, only you know. I don't think God's trying to trick Ezekiel. I think God's trying to get Ezekiel on his wavelength. Sometimes we're trying to think so much down here about God that God's trying to be, hey, think bigger. Hey, dream bigger. Hey, ask bigger. Hey, just think crazy. Think dangerous, as Craig Rochelle says. How do we do this? But only with Him. It is within Him that we have our substance. And it is because of God breathed life into us that we have life. And it is now on this side of the cross because Christ died a death. He made a sacrifice that we may have eternal life. Bara is only in God, the Hebrew word. It is divine and only for a divine subject. And asa is the other word for creation that I talked about, in that it can be through us and that humanity can be the subject. And I wrote here, looking at Genesis 2:7 as closing, the body is the physical, right? The body is the physical creation. It's amazing. It's formed out of substance, but it's the breath that's divine. And don't miss this. Don't miss this, that when something can be created, it is amazing, it is good. But unless it has the breath of God, it is not divine. And unless it has the breath of God, it will not live. And God breathed life into the nostrils of Adam, and in that, Adam was formed. Adam had his being. Adam was alive. And it is through the breath of God that we are alive. It's through the sacrifice of Christ, the conquering of the grave, that we have salvation. So we're going to go into worship, and then we're going to close. But I really just wanted to ask, is God the creator in Genesis, or is God the creator full stop? Do we leave God in Genesis as the creator, or are we allowing the creator to still create? I don't know what it is for your circumstance. 2019 ended pretty well for me. I got a ring to prove it. But as I walk into a marriage, as we walk into our marriage, God still creates something anew. And we still need God's breath and life into us. As we walk into this campus, we can start great, but we still need God's life to carry us. I don't know what it is. I started a new job, and I'm constantly praying, God, if this is where you want me, to put me here. And if it's not where you want me, to pull me out. And it's not because I'm afraid. It's because I want to be so aware that if God, if this is what you have for me, then let it be. If this is what it has for me, give me the life to see it succeed. Give me the life to bless people. Give me the life to bless my boss, to bless the business, whatever it is. But if this is not where you want me to be, God, create something anew. Create a different path. Show me the path you have for me. But what is it that you need created afresh? What is it that you need restored? And what is it that only God can create? That only if God moves will it come to pass?